This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
I mean, we're all going to die, right? Like, it's not like any of us want our loved ones to die. No matter when it happens, we're never going to be happy that it's happening. But what we can do is really connect with them on such an intimate level and really just be in this space that can be very beautiful in a normal, natural part of our human existence. But we need some education around that, and we need some open discussions, and we need people to just feel comfortable having the conversations.
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. I'm talking with the host of the Seeing Death Clearly podcast, Death Doula Jill McClennen. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
The sponsor for today's episode is the Death Deck. The Death Deck is a card game and conversation tool that uses humor to create lively conversations about a topic that impacts us all, death. The Death Deck's goal is to normalize conversations on death and dying. The Death Deck also features the EOL deck, or End of Life deck. Designed for use with individuals who may be approaching end of life, the EOL deck digs deep into legacy building and end-of-life preferences. Visit thedeathdeck.com to order your decks today. This episode is sponsored by International Doula Life Movement. International Doula Life Movement proudly presents their free online birthday bash from January 8 to January 12, 2024. The Birthday Bash is IDLM's gift to the doula community. This is an opportunity to connect with like-minded professionals, exchange ideas, and build lasting relationships that will elevate your death doula practice. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity. Register now at internationaldoulalifemovement.com/classes. And remember, it's free.
Oh man, I love my guest today. We are kindred spirits. She is an end-of-life doula. She's a podcaster. We were just simpatico, if that's the right word. So Jill McClennen is a certified death doula, and she works as a death doula and an end-of-life coach. She helps people prepare themselves and their loved ones for the end of life. She offers guidance and emotional support regardless of physical distance, so she offers remote services. She's a trauma-sensitive yoga instructor. She also incorporates Reiki and shamanic healing techniques into her care to help clients address their fears surrounding death, help them to cope with the dying process, and also to navigate their grief. Jill is the host of the Seeing Death Clearly podcast. On her show, she's talking with guests as they share valuable insights and stories related to end-of-life matters, and it further extends her mission to promote understanding and compassion about this important stage of life. Jill wanted to work in end-of-life work, but she didn't want to be a nurse. She didn't want to be a nurse because there are a lot of different aspects to nursing that you have to learn and go through before you even get to the point where you could work in end-of-life care. So she found a different way to work in this space as a death doula. She has to explain to most people what a death doula does. No surprise there, right? Doulas are just now becoming a mainstream term that people are aware of. Jill is able to fill in these gaps where hospice falls short and the care needs are still there. There are certain gaps in healthcare where death doulas can make quite a difference. And Jill is one of those people doing that work. She said she was surprised that healthcare workers find it so difficult to cope with death. And that's a big part of our conversation. You're going to hear about her experiences and what she's seen in her work and her experience. You're going to hear her story about how she was a caregiver as a younger woman for her 90-year-old grandmother. And that's how she got to be familiar with hospice. So here's my conversation with certified death doula Jill McClennen. Jill, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
I know we've waited a while, so it's great to talk with you, and I get to see you over Zoom, even if we're not in the same room. So I have an icebreaker question for you, so my listeners get to know you a little bit better. When you've had a really bad day, a rough day, what's your go-to self-care habit?
Well, that's a great question. In the past, it used to be a glass of wine, for sure. You know, I would get home from whatever I was doing that day. Now I am basically completely sober. I will occasionally drink, maybe like once every few months. So for me, I still really need alone time. I'm that type of person that I need to just be by myself, which is hard when you have two kids. But I will try to make sure that I go into what I consider like my meditation space, my yoga space. And I just have to sit in meditation by myself for at least a few minutes to just calm my body and my mind. Because you need that. You need that. I think on a regular basis, though, I have fewer and fewer really bad days because I practice meditation and my yoga practice regularly. So I don't need to do it as often, but it definitely helps to have that alone time to just get everything out of my brain and move my body maybe if I need to as well.
I like that. So you've identified that you need some space where it's just for this, just for a few minutes. Yeah, having kids reduces your alone time a lot.
Yes, it does. And I was always the type of person, I need my alone time. And so it was actually one of the hardest adjustments for me with having children was that it was like, oh, now I have like these little humans attached to me almost all the time. And then when I go out into the world, I have to be with people. So now I just have to be intentional to carve that space out for me to have my time. And that's why even my regular daily practice, I get up early in the morning to do it before anybody else wakes up. So I'm guaranteed to be by myself, because if not, my daughter comes in here and she'll sit with me and I'll be doing yoga or I'll be trying to meditate. And she'll be like, are you done yet? Are you done yet? Are you done yet? And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm done now. So yes, I have to get up early to make sure I get that practice in daily. It makes a huge difference in my life.
When you work in a care profession, the way you do as a doula, you have to create those habits for yourself because our families, they love us, but they are not going to create those spaces for us.
Yes.
They may allow us the time to do it, but they're not going to create, especially children, those tiny humans. No, what are you doing? Why can't I do that with you? It doesn't work. So we have to be responsible for carving that out for ourselves and paying ourselves with that. That's the way I think about it. Paying myself first is making sure that's a priority for me. That's a great habit. Great self-care.
Yeah.
So you work as an end-of-life doula. A lot of wear and tear, but it's amazing work to work with those who are at end of life. How did you even get to be working in this space?
I am a career changer. At 40 years old, I decided that I wanted to work as a death doula. I'm originally from food service, so it's a completely different, that's where it's a completely different field in some ways, but it's also service. It was very much, even in food service, right, about giving to people, about caring for people, just in a different way. And so once I realized that there was that connection, it helped me bring my previous job skills into what I do now. But I had taken care of my grandmother at the end of her life, and it was just such a it was a difficult experience because I had no idea what I was doing, but it also was such a beautiful experience for me to be able to do that for her. And hospice was amazing. I really could not have done it without at that point, I don't even think I'd seen anybody except for just hospice nurses. Because, of course, like a lot of people, we didn't get hospice involved until it was like the last couple weeks of her life because I didn't know any better. I didn't know that we should have brought hospice in probably months earlier. Nobody told me. None of the doctors talked to me about it. But the hospice nurses were so caring in making sure that every question I had, they would sit there while they were working with my grandmother, doing things that I was like, you're amazing because I couldn't do that. But also, I love this work that you do. And I think I want to maybe consider going back to school to become a hospice nurse. I just don't know if I could be a nurse. And that was when I had a 6-month-old baby. So, I also owned a bakery at the time. Life was just not in a position to do it then. And it was 9 years later when I heard of a death doula on a podcast. And when I heard it, I was like, oh, that's what I want to do. Because again, I didn't want to do the nursing part, but I wanted to be the person that could help out a entire family, right? Not just the person that's dying, but like I wanted to go in and work with the person that was dying, be somebody that could answer the questions to educate the family, to also really say, maybe you get diagnosed with a terminal illness. You can call in a death doula then, even if you're going to do treatment, so that this way I can be with you and your family along the way. And then I could maybe recommend, like I have a client now that I just recommended he get in touch with hospice. I was like, it's time. It doesn't mean you're going to die tomorrow, but it's really time for you to get in touch with hospice. They're going to help you manage your pain. They're going to help you manage your symptoms. And so now he did, but nobody else was recommending it. His doctor wasn't. Nobody in the nursing home he's living at was recommending it. And so he was suffering and nobody was giving him this option. And so I was able to kind of get that ball rolling. So now he'll hopefully get the care he needs. And so that's really what I wanted to do, was just be able to be that person for other people to help you and families understand what the realities of end of life look like, what options there are out there, and make it so that you can focus on either being with your family because you're dying or being with your person that's dying and not having to worry about figuring things out on your own because it doesn't look like it does in movies, which is, of course, what I expected. I thought grandma was going to sleep a lot because that's what you see in movies. And the first night I was home with her and she didn't know who I was. She thought I was a nurse. And she kept saying to me, my granddaughter has a baby the same age as yours. And I was like, what did I get myself into? Like, what is happening? And then she was talking to people that weren't there. And so really by the time hospice showed up the next day, I was like, I'm so exhausted. I'm so confused. I have no idea what's happening. And they were like, oh, honey, okay, it's going to be all right. This is normal. This is natural. Like it was amazing. I really cannot speak highly enough about hospice and the work that hospice does for people at the end of life. It's amazing.
How old were you, Jill, when you were taking care of your grandmother?
So I was late 20s, early 30s. She died when I was 33, but I lived with her for 4 years leading up to her death.
Leading up to that.
Yeah.
I guess in my head, I'm thinking, oh, well, when you're younger, you don't have as much caregiving experience, but most people don't have any caregiving experience or training before they go into it. So say, me, I'm almost 58 and my mom is almost 91. I've never had any hands-on caregiving experience in my own home.
A lot.
Yeah. So we all go into that a little bit blindly, I think. Hospice can be a huge resource, but a doula is a guide and a companion along the way. A lot of education, a lot of support, but in a really holistic way. I know that some doulas are nurses, but you don't have to be a nurse to be a doula. End-of-life doulas have their own specific training. So what's the biggest myth that you've ever heard about the work of an end-of-life doula or a death doula?
I don't know if I've heard myths necessarily. Most people, honestly, will just say, wait, you do what? I've never even heard of that.
Yeah.
And even I did a talk at a college locally this week, and there was at least 4 people in there that said they either were nurses and they were just, going back to school for other stuff. One woman was like a home health aide. So like these are people that are working in this space and nobody had ever heard of a death doula. So it's not even that there's like a lot of myths out there. It's just that most people are like, I've never heard of what you do. So
Yeah.
you have to really start from the beginning of explaining to people what it is that we do. And it's difficult sometimes because all death doulas do things a little bit differently, which is great. But when I'm trying to explain a death doula and they'll say, well, do you work with grief? And I'm like, well, I do, but not all death doulas do. Well, do you work with the families?
Right.
Well, I do, but not all death doulas do. We all do it a little bit differently. And it's starting to get out there now. Like we were just talking about that, even Hospice News wrote an article and it mentioned death doulas. And I was like so excited to see that it's getting into that space. And it's starting to get into even fiction books and movies. People always send me things like, oh, look, I saw a death doula in this movie the other day. So it's getting out there. But most of the time, I just have to really start from the beginning with people and say, well, do you know what a birth doula is? We're similar to a birth doula. We're just on the other end of the spectrum, and it is holistic care. There's no medical care. So we're similar to hospice, but we're not a hospice nurse. It's like I just have to try to compare it to something that they at least have a little understanding. And even now, I will sometimes say to people that I'm a end of life coach, because I was explaining to somebody once what I do. And they said, oh, you almost sound like a life coach. And I said, oh, I guess I kind of am just an end of life coach. I'm there to help people be prepared for the end of life. So again, it's just right now, there's just most people don't have any preconceived ideas of what we do.
I love it that Hospice News picked up that article and started a dialogue on a larger level. So Hospice News writes a lot about the industry itself, about hospice care in the United States. And I love it that they're talking about there's value. There's value in having a death doula or an end-of-life doula. The way I've explained it to people, like in my family, if I'm saying, oh, I'm interviewing an end-of-life doula today, they've never heard the word doula. They get the end-of-life part, but they've never heard the word doula. And I said, so a doula is like a midwife. So when you think of a birth doula, it's a midwife, which is more relatable, I think, for people. So what I say is a death doula or an end-of-life doula is like a midwife for someone who's dying.
Yeah.
It's sort of all the processes we do at birth, kind of going backwards. And I think that part of it sort of resonates with people. But most of the time, people who work in healthcare even, they're just, I hate to use the word ignorant, they just don't know. They just don't know about doulas.
And there's definitely resistance. I was slightly surprised because I do a lot of networking in person, with different elder care, whether it's lawyers or people that run assisted livings and the different hospices locally. And I was really surprised at how much resistance there was from the people in hospice. And I'm not sure if it's that they think that they already do what I do. I think that's a part of it, is there's still that like, well, we already do that. We don't need anybody else that does it. Or if they think we're competing with them. But I've just been trying to really explain that it's similar to a lot of what is done in hospice, but really it's not a replacement for hospice. I'm never going to come in and replace anybody in hospice, whether it's the chaplains or the social workers or the nurses, but I'm just there as like an added benefit, an added layer. And at one of the networking events, I was talking with an elder care lawyer and somebody from a hospice, and the elder care lawyer said, I think death doulas are that bridge for the gap that we've all known is there. We just couldn't figure out what to do. And I was like, okay, perfect. All right, we're getting there. We're getting somewhere now. People are starting to understand where we can fit in. But it's hard because even sometimes I don't know where I can fit in. because there are so many moving parts and all these different industries that are overlapping that work with people that are aging at the end of life. And so even for me, I'm trying to figure out the best way to communicate how I can work together with some of these other industries. And there is a local elder care law office that recently brought me on as like a contracted employee to help families basically create an end of life care plan. And this way, it's just something else. It's not a legal document, but they could use that to write their legal documents. I just help them get really clear on what they want. So I now have this, it was like 12 pages by the time I was done, where I created it. It's similar to the idea of like 5 wishes, but I knew there was just other things I wanted. So I just made up my own. And it's just having that conversation and having people get clear on what they want so that then it can get communicated to the people that it needs to get communicated with. And so I'm thinking this is going to hopefully be a good, like kind of like entrance into some of these spaces too, is again, I'm not doing anything that anybody else is doing. I'm just adding to what's already being done.
What I think is that hospice could do those things. We either choose not to, or we don't have time to. And when I say choose not to, I think we choose not to because we don't get paid for it, or we're not staffed well enough to do it, or it's not considered productive. It doesn't move things forward. It's not reimbursable. It's not billable. And I think there are things that we should have been doing all along, and the role of the doula wouldn't be needed. The doula would not be needed if we were able and willing to do all of those things. But I don't think we are. And consequently, I think maybe we're not as skilled at doing those things as we used to be. Where the doula shines because that's all they do. They're great at that. And so you working with an elder law attorney, with an elder law firm, and helping to have those conversations, that's really an amazing way of helping people figure out, this is what I value, this is what I believe, this has been my experience, these are my wishes, and then you can communicate that in a way that can be translated into a document. Because we know the discussion's not enough when it comes to advanced care planning. We know the documentation by itself is not really enough. Because you can't water down and dehydrate end-of-life wishes into a couple of documents, a medical power of attorney and a directive to physicians. That's not enough because it doesn't talk specifically about quality of life and where I want to die and who I want to take care of me, things like that. So to have a doula be able to have those conversations and guide, again, that's a word that keeps coming to me, to guide someone to having those conversations, which, by the way, those are very, very difficult conversations to have. And so I true confessions here, I do not have an advanced care plan documented. And I've been very honest on the show about this because, it's practice what you preach. I don't. I want to have an advanced care plan. My listeners probably know more about my end-of-life wishes than my own family. I have a husband, I have 2 kids. When I have tried to talk with them specifically, it either gets brushed off. I've been told I'm not going to remember any of that. Just write it down. Or, my children find it very difficult to talk about that kind of thing with me. I find it very grievous to have those conversations. And that's where a doula can provide not just the practical stuff, what do you believe, what do you value, what do you think, but to say, this is normal to feel this way. Here's how you can move through this in a healthy way and provide that support. So maybe that's what it is. I just figured out I need a doula.
Yeah.
I need a doula. Jill, you're going to have to work with me to do my advanced care plan.
Perfect. And that's where, as you were saying, hospice can do some of this stuff. But honestly, when I sit with people and do these care plans, it was a 3-hour conversation because it's 2 hours of talking about what you want. But because it is a sensitive subject, we talk a little bit about what you want, and then we go off on a little side tangent of just like talking about things that are pleasant. And then we go back to the plan. And I have that ability to give 3 hours. because it's my own business. It's my time. It's my schedule. Where even volunteering with a hospice staff at a hospital, there's days when I'm there and they'll text me and they'll just be like, we can't be in all these places. Like, I would love to go and sit with this person. I just can't. Can you please go sit with them? They're actively dying and we don't want to leave them alone and they have nobody. So I'm
Right.
like,
and there's just not enough time.
exactly. I'm like, perfect. That's what I'm here for. And so I will go and I will sit with the person for the hour, 2 hours, as long as I can. But you're right. It's not that hospice doesn't even want to. They're just in a place now where they're not really able to. And that's why there's a lot of death doulas that honestly don't want to get involved with hospice. They don't want to get involved with insurance and Medicaid and all these things, because we have the freedom to do things how we want to do them. And not meaning like in a reckless way, but just if I want to sit with a client for 3 hours, I can do it. I don't have to answer to somebody about why I was there for 3 hours. I don't have to worry about billing out for those 3 hours.
Right. Were you productive that day to a certain extent that's required?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that does make a difference.
It does. It does. I think people don't want to feel rushed. They want to feel like they are the only client you have, that it's all about them. And it should be. Anybody who's talking about their end of life wishes should feel like that conversation is all about them, because it absolutely is. And I see hospice being less and less able to have those conversations. And I wonder if, because we haven't flexed that muscle, is if we're just, the muscles become weak and we're just not as good at it as we used to be.
And that's part of it, I'm sure, too, is that the further you get away from something, just naturally, the harder it is to get back into that space, because all these other things have kind of taken priority. And you're right, the conversation is not easy to have. And it really is something that nobody is going to feel really comfortable having the conversation if they feel like they're being rushed, if they feel like you're not fully present with them, because it is vulnerable. And it's important to have this conversation. Like you were saying, you know, you're youngish, you're healthy, you still need to have this conversation, because
Sure.
any of us at any point could die. I know none of us like thinking about that, but it's the reality. And so I do try to say to people, because I'll get a lot of folks that'll ask me, well, when should I call a death doula? And I say, well, honestly, right now. Let's have this conversation right now. Let's get these things down in writing. Let's think about it. Let's have the conversations with your family. Like I've been on Zooms where I kind of mediate the conversation between the different family members, because again, there's people like your daughters and like your husband, and everybody's having their own emotions. And so having somebody to be able to help the conversation flow and kind of just, I am not attached to the situation.
Right. Not invested the same way.
Exactly. So it helps to have somebody like that be present for the conversation, because it's important that we do it. If for some reason, if God forbid, if something happened, your family's still going to have to deal with these things. They're still going to have to think about what you want. They're going to have to answer questions about what you want. They're still going to be in a position where potentially you're not going to be around afterwards. But by having the conversation ahead of time, knowing what it is that you want, that gives them the ability to be with you fully present, being able to spend time with you, not answering questions that doctors are asking and they don't have any idea because we've not had this conversation yet. So it's really a gift for all of you involved. And hopefully you won't need it for a really, really long time. Right. But it doesn't matter. We can have it done now, and then you could update it over time as things change. But the conversation really should be had. And you're right that death doulas can come in and just help people have the conversation. Where hospice, you have to have 6 months or less. Like, this isn't a conversation that they're going to have with somebody that's like me, that's 45 and healthy, And I'm trying to get all of my friends to have these conversations because we have, most of us have children, we have spouses. Like, have you thought about it? Have you talked about it? And they're like, oh gosh, no.
Yeah.
And that fear is real. The fear is understandable. And part of why the fear is there is because we're really good at avoiding it. And if we avoid the conversation, it's never going to get easier. But there's a lot of things in life that, it's uncomfortable. It might be painful, but that's part of being a human. And that's where, for me, again, maybe it's a little easier in some ways because I have a movement and a meditation practice where if I am thinking about something uncomfortable, if I'm having an uncomfortable conversation, I've gotten really in tune with my body where I can feel where I feel the discomfort, right? Like in our minds, we're like, no, I don't want to talk about this, but there's something going on. Our chest gets tight, or maybe our stomach starts to hurt, like
your shoulders come up.
Exactly. Your shoulders get tense. So then your neck starts to hurt. So like something's also happening in your body. And so I've learned to really move my body to move that energy out. That when I'm feeling anxious about something, if I'm feeling like the discomfort in the situation is too much, I've learned to move my body to help get that energy out, but then to still be able to be present and show up for these conversations. Because, it's life. We are going to have uncomfortable conversations. If you are in a relationship of any sort with any other human, you're going to have uncomfortable conversations about something.
Exactly.
The Heart of Hospice is proud to feature this episode's sponsor, the Death Deck, the game and conversation tool that's changing the way we talk about life's most profound subject, death. Featuring 112 cards with multiple choice and open-ended questions, the Death Deck sparks lively discussions whether you're with your partner, your family, or a group of friends. The Death Deck can also be used at conferences or work gatherings as a creative icebreaker. It's easy to hand-select the questions that fit best with your audience. People are also gathering in breweries and their communities to host Death Over Drafts events, using the Death Deck to engage participants in conversations about death and dying. The Death Deck now features a new product, the EOL Deck, or End of Life Deck. The EOL Deck has softer language designed for individuals who may be approaching end of life. Both decks educate the participants on topics related to hospice and palliative care services, death doulas, green disposition, and end-of-life options. For a 20% discount, use the code HOSPICE20 at checkout. Visit thedeathdeck.com to order your decks today. It's time to start the conversation. This episode is sponsored by International Doula Life Movement. International Doula Life Movement proudly presents their online Birthday Bash from January the 8th to January 12th, 2024. And the best part? It's absolutely free. Join International Doula Life Movement for 5 days of inspiration, education, and celebration. This virtual event brings together nurses, doulas, and authors specializing in end-of-life care for an unforgettable experience. You'll be diving into intensive training sessions led by experienced nurses, renowned death doulas, and best-selling authors. Learn the latest in death doula practices, discover new techniques, and expand your skill set. The Birthday Bash is IDLM's gift to the doula community. This is an opportunity to connect with like-minded professionals, exchange ideas, and build lasting relationships that will elevate your death doula practice. This is your chance to learn from the best in the business. Explore the many facets of death doula work, whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting your journey. Uncover the various roles death doulas play and discover the unique contributions each type brings to the end-of-life experience. Don't miss out on this incredible opportunity to celebrate International Death Doula Life Movement's online Birthday Bash, January the 8th to January 12th, 2024. And remember, it's free. Register now at internationaldoulalifemovement.com/classes.
So when you talk about the timing of these conversations with a doula, think about the two options. You can have the conversation now. It's basically a family conference with a facilitator who's very skilled, helps keep the boat moving forward, helps you identify what's important, summarize things. Here's what I hear you saying, so that you feel seen, you feel heard, you've been helped to identify these values that you have. Or you can wait, and you can have that conversation in a hospital conference room with a physician that has never met your loved one or you, who is pressed for time and is telling you, we need a decision right now. And by the way, you haven't slept in 3 days. You've eaten out of the vending machine, and you're grieving so hard that you can't even see straight. And maybe you haven't even brushed your teeth since all of this happened. That's not the best time and place and circumstance for making a decision like this.
No, it's not at all. And I've been in some of those rooms when the doctors have been having the conversation with family members. And the way that doctors speak, they're not doing it on purpose, but it's like anybody, when you know something really well, you're not necessarily speaking in terms that somebody can understand. So when they start saying all of these things, like, well, do they want to be innovated? Do they want this? Do they want that? And you're like, I don't even know what that means. And now you're expecting me to answer this question around something that I don't know what it means. And so that's part of what I do when I do my plans with my families is again, I don't have a medical background, but I've learned a lot about it and I'm constantly learning. And if I don't know, I have people that I text and I'm like, hey, what is this? Like, please help me understand. But so I can help people understand, again, the reality, not what it looks like on TV. Like if you see people innovated on TV, it's like they're just laying there all peaceful with like a little piece of tape, and like
it's so fake.
It's so fake. And the first time I saw it in person, I was like, oh, wow. Okay.
So this is really what it looks like.
This is really what it looks like.
And Michael Landon's not here.
No.
If you're old enough to remember that show, it was called Highway to Heaven.
I do.
For my listeners who are too young to remember that.
I forgot about it, but when you said it, I pictured it in my head immediately. I was like, oh.
Yeah, Michael Landon was, I guess, an angel or something. I don't remember, but he would show up when people were dying. Yeah, and then the white light would shine from above. That never happens.
No.
None of that's real. People are not telling you at that very moment just before they die, well, here's grandma's recipe for lasagna that she brought over from the old country, and you take this and this and that and that, and your grandfather was married 6 times and has 3 children we didn't even know about. That does not happen. Those deathbed confessions, that doesn't happen. People are typically nonverbal. There's visioning going on where they are communicating and connecting with other things besides what's in that particular environment they're in. And most of the stuff you see on media is not even real. It's not even close to being real.
Correct. And it also doesn't have to be as scary as, like, I'm sure people are visualizing it to be right now, right? As we're talking about it. Because again, like so many things in life, if we have a little bit of education about something, about what the realities are about the situation, and if we feel prepared because we've had conversations, because we've worked these things out already, then when we walk into that situation, it's not going to be as scary and traumatic and overwhelming. Because when you talk to most people and they'll say, oh, my grandmother's death was super traumatic for me. And then you start talking about why. It's, again, they didn't know what they were walking into. There's machines, families are fighting, people are yelling at each other. It doesn't have to be that way. If we could prepare even a little bit, it would cut down on a lot of the really negative parts that we see around death and dying. It's a really beautiful time to be with your loved one. I mean, we're all going to die, right? Like, it's not like any of us want our loved ones to die. No matter when it happens, we're never going to be happy that it's happening. But what we can do is really connect with them on such an intimate level and really just be in this space that can be very beautiful in a normal, natural part of our human existence. But we need some education around that, and we need some open discussions, and we need people to just feel comfortable having the conversations, which is why you have your podcast, why I have my podcast, to get people used to hearing these conversations in a way that's not morbid, it's not scary, it's a conversation. That's it.
I think healthcare workers need to find that level of comfort too. So have you ever experienced a conversation where a clinician told a family, do you want us to do everything?
Yeah.
What in the heck does that mean? That is a very, forgive me, healthcare people that have used it, I probably have used that phrasing, but that's a lazy way of avoiding having a complicated conversation and offering more education, more information. Well, of course we want you to do everything for mom. What kind of terrible people are we that we wouldn't want you to do everything? Well, everything runs the gamut, from intubation all the way down to central lines and having a bed that turns her every 2 hours, all these different things. But because it's easier for us to say it in one big chunk and get an answer, do you want everything? Yes, I do. It's kind of like asking what you want on your burger. Do you want it all the way? Yes.
Yeah.
Except you can't apply that kind of philosophy, that kind of thinking to healthcare. I have been privy to those conversations. I've been part of them.
I was so surprised when I started in this field that doctors and nurses are not better at death and dying. I really genuinely thought they're going to be fine with it because they experience it all the time. And even in the hospital, I've had the palliative care doctor say to me, can you please go talk to this nurse? She's in the hallway crying because her patient's dying and she can't accept it. Doctors that have been no, we need to keep doing things. And the palliative care team's no, we really don't. Hospice is here. We don't. And the doctors I can't deal with this. I can't handle this. And I was wow. There's some piece there that is not, I don't know if it's getting missed. I guess, from, again, some of the conversations that I've had, it's not necessarily that they get training in death and dying. They get training in how to save people and how to extend life. And so no wonder they're not having honest, open conversations with families because they can't even face the fact that their patient's dying. And so how were they supposed to have that conversation? And again, it's not, I'm not trying to be judgmental about it. It's just something that coming in as an outsider was so shocking to me and also so obvious that there's a need for healthcare, doctors, nurses, whatever else, to have a better training and a better understanding of that we all die eventually. It gets to a point where some of the treatments that they suggest for people and that they do to people are really causing more pain and suffering than actually extending a life, maybe a little bit. But what type of life is it? Again, if you're in a bed and you're hooked up to machines and you have to get turned every 2 hours, is that life?
Right.
If you asked most people, do you want to live like this? They would say no. But yet, even if you ask them, well, do you want everything done? They'll say yes. So again, it's not like it is in TV. So we need to get really clear on what everything really actually looks like, because I don't want a lot of the things that I've seen, especially depending on where I'm at in life. Yes, at 45, if I was to collapse right now, I want everything done. Do your best to save me. I have 2 little kids. Fine. At 80 years old, is that going to be my same answer? Absolutely not. At 90, definitely not, but I'll talk to people that they'll be, 85, 90 years old, all kinds of health problems. And they're well, yeah, I want CPR and I want to be intubated. I want, open heart surgery. And I'm do you really though?
I think in theory they do, because again, what we see is completely skewed, completely unrealistic on TV and movies. And what they see is this miraculous 30-minute spin on some horrendous healthcare event. And it just doesn't work that way. But also, we're in a culture of, we value youth, we value vitality, you battle. That's, we've started to figure out that this fight language we use about illnesses makes it sound like somehow you failed when you die. Death is not a failure. Death is a natural act. And when it comes to educating clinicians, physicians and nurses, I went through labor and delivery when I was in school because everybody had to. There was not a class on death and dying. Not all my patients had babies because some of them were male, and yet 100% of the patients I've had died in my care or were going to die at some point. Yeah, it's upside down.
Yeah.
And so to me, it's not critical to talk about this stuff because we are aware of it. It is the elephant in the room. We know we're bad at this. Mm-hmm. So I think having a conversation that acknowledges it and say, we want to do better. Let's talk about doing better. End-of-life doulas can contribute to the care being better. The quality of life for our patients. Let's talk about that. I think that's important.
I think so too.
I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about you personally in your doula work. What do you find for yourself personally that challenges you most when it comes to working as an end-of-life doula?
Oh man, I think at this point, the biggest thing that challenges me is figuring out how to make this sustainable in the long run. And it's not about working with the clients. Like working with the clients, I so far haven't had any experience that I've been like, oh, I don't know, this might be too much for me. I might not be able to do it. The first time I sat with somebody that was actively dying, I was like, what do I do with my time? Like, I don't know what to do. So then I figured out, okay, well, I'm going to actually read to people, right? So that they could hear my voice. And then I couldn't figure out what to read. So then I started writing my own thing, right? So like all those little challenges I figured out along the way. But it's really difficult because right now I'm not getting a lot of paid clients. And of course, like anything in life, I need to be able to support myself to do this work, or I'm going to have to go back to a job where I get a paycheck. Right. And then I can't do this work because it is emotionally draining to do this work, which again, I have a great self-care practice. I've, learned to really work with it so that I don't get overwhelmed, but I can't do both. And so to me, that's honestly the biggest challenge that I've come across. The working with the clients, people will ask me that. They'll say, oh, isn't it really hard? Like, don't you get emotionally attached? And I'm like, well, yeah, the clients that I have worked with that have died, whether I've seen them, close to that time or it's just afterwards, of course, there's a little part of me that's like, oh, but then I also feel really grateful that I was able to be with them and offer them some type of comfort, offer them something that helped them at the end of life. I feel privileged to do that work. And yeah, I can't think of like anything around doing the actual client work that's really been a challenge for me. I love it. I think it really is an honor for me to be in this space with people. Sometimes the families can be a little bit more difficult, but again, that's the family dynamic, right?
I like the diplomacy there.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. Like they're going through their own process and I want to be supportive of their process. But, I'll definitely get like a lot of questions about like what my religious beliefs are and like, well, mom believes this and what do you believe? And I'm like, well, it doesn't matter what I believe. Like, I am genuinely here to support mom in whatever she believes, And then people want to ask, like, do I talk to ghosts? Do I talk to spirits? And I'm like,
my word.
Where did that come from? Like,
so they're exploring where the boundaries are on what a doula does, and they're just checking to make sure that you're not doing stuff that they think would be way off.
I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. So again, sometimes that's been a little bit more difficult, but mostly I've had really just lovely experiences, whether I've worked with people around grief. Of course, I've heard some really difficult stories for me to hear, right? When I talked to a woman whose 12-year-old son just didn't wake up one morning, I was like, oh, okay, that's hard. That's hard for me to hear. But again, that's when I have to turn to my practices of, all right, like, yes, that could happen to me. I'm not special. There's nothing that says that won't be me. But also, I can't control that. She couldn't control it. There was nothing she could do or not do to prevent that from happening. So, like some of the difficult conversations, that's when, again, I turn to my self care. That's when I turn to my practice of just getting very clear within me of what I can handle and what I can't. So, that's why even at the hospital, I have not worked with any children. I don't know if I could. If it was like really a serious situation and they said, really, this mom needs you, this child needs you, I would potentially try. But I've said I would prefer to just not go into that space because I have two young kids. It just might be too much for me. So I'm pretty good at knowing my boundaries and what I can and cannot handle, which is the good thing, I think, with coming into this career at a later age, is I've learned over the last, however many years in my previous career that I need to be really clear on my boundaries and what works for me and what doesn't. And so far, it's actually really just been beautiful experiences with all of my clients.
It's amazing. I know as a hospice nurse, people have said to me, that work, it must be so depressing. And what I tell them is sometimes it's sad, but it's not depressing. It's always sad to watch someone else suffer, to watch loss, to watch grief, someone else grief. But it's not depressing in that way because there is value that we bring. And so there's a great deal of, for lack of a better word, job satisfaction to be able to work. Now, the family dynamics, wow. I mean, that's always going to be there. It's just the way it is. Sometimes people are just crazy and things get out of hand. And when you're dealing with volatile emotions and frightening situations, and then you layer grief on top of it, and that whatever relational history they've had, things get out of control.
Yes.
Easily. And we just deal with that. I think that finding your meditation spot after we've dealt with that, and that's part of what we do. Anybody who works in end-of-life care will tell you that. We deal with the family dynamics, and that's why we have doulas and social workers and chaplains who are so skilled at those conversations. We need them.
I've said that to some of the people that run like the different assisted livings, where I'm like, look, a good time to call me would also be when you have to have that conversation with the family that, mom needs to get transferred onto hospice. Like, she's lived with us for however long, but now it's beyond what we can do. Because sometimes they said they just really, they have a really hard time with that conversation with families and the dynamics between the families. So that's a great time to call me. I can come in, people are having big feelings, they're having big emotions. I can talk to them about that so you can do your job. And so hospice can do their job. Let me deal with the family dynamics and the emotions and all of the, fighting and whatever else. Like, I'm not afraid of people fighting with each other. I can calm the situation. So that's another great place that, again, not all doulas will potentially do that work, but that's something that I feel like is, again, a bridge. There's a gap there. I could be that bridge that can fill that space to allow everybody else to get their job done, not worrying that like one sister's fighting with the other sister about what's correct and what's not. So that's a great place for a doula.
I think also for people that have been caring for someone who's been a resident in a facility, an assisted living or a long-term care facility, there's a different sort of relationship. The care has been ongoing for a long time, maybe, and you're anticipating continuing to care for that person. I think the investment is a little bit different, a little bit deeper, because I have seen facility staff members that grieved a resident who died as if that was one of their family members, because they've had those people living with in their facility and they've been caring for them for years. A lot of times it feels like a much more personal loss, I think, for them.
And they've potentially spent more time with that person than their family has.
That's true.
Right? You hear that too, where we are just getting more and more in this place where we just want to put the old people away. We don't want to deal with it. Let's just put them somewhere, maybe visit once a week if we're lucky. We get over there once a week for an hour. And it's hard too, because there's a lot of people that are like me that I waited until I was older, until I had kids. I was mid 30s, right? While I was still having children. My parents are older. So I'm in what they would call the sandwich generation. I still have to work. I still have to take care of children. If for, some reason, if my mother had to be, put into a facility because she needed care and I couldn't do it, it's not like I could be there as much as I would want. I would try to get there once a week, at least a few hours, but it's not easy for people now to be able to go and spend time with somebody. So yeah, you get these, health aides and the nurses and whatever else, they're spending so much time with somebody over the last couple of years of their life that I could see how it would be very hard when that person dies. You would have to grieve. And that's what I tell people about grief, though, is grief is okay, right? It's normal. It's natural. The thing that's not okay is that so many of us have been taught to not show it, to hold it all in. And then when we hold it in, that's when it can lead to health problems. I mean, I do believe that sometimes when we hold in our emotions and we hold in our trauma, then it leads to some of the health problems that we have. But it's also that grieving outwardly and grieving in a way that feels right for us, it's hard sometimes because we are getting judged for it. And especially if it's your career, it's like, well, this is your job. Like, why are you grieving so hard over somebody when it's just your job? Well, yeah, I could still grieve them. And so that's why, again, having that self-care practice and having time when you can be in your space and really feel the grief. Don't be afraid to feel it. We're so afraid to feel feelings, good and bad, right? We're so afraid to feel things fully. But I really try to talk to people, and especially my clients, that, again, that movement, that practice of like moving things through your body will help you feel it, and it won't feel like you're going to get lost. You're not going to get swallowed up by it. We're afraid if we start to feel it, it's never going to end. When really that's when it is going to end, is when we actually allow ourselves to fully feel it rather than feeling it a little bit and then shoving it down and trying not to cry. And I still practice with that. I've never been a crier, quote unquote, right? Like somebody that could cry easily. So there's times now when I feel like I want to cry for something and my body just kind of starts to shut it down. And then I'm like, no, sometimes it needs to come out. So it's okay. Again, there's no judgment if people are like, I don't feel good letting out my emotions. I get it. I really do. But we really need to work on feeling more comfortable expressing our emotions in a healthy manner, right? We self-medicate a lot, but we don't always get things out in healthy manners.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, Jill, so if you could tell someone only 3 things about end-of-life doulas, only 3, because there's so many dimensions to what a doula does, what 3 things would you tell them?
I would tell them that, again, it's never too early to talk to a death doula. We can support you through any stage of life preparing yourself. That the more that you can prepare yourself for death and dying, honestly, the better you'll live your life. It really does help you to show up in a way that you can actually really experience your life and appreciate your life. So don't start later, start earlier. And that it really is a holistic model of care where we're going to work with your thoughts, your feelings, your spiritual beliefs. It's not about my spiritual beliefs, but we're going to work in that whole realm to help you get really clear on what it is that you want for the end of your life. And then even as it nears the end of life, we will really be there to be with you and to support you and advocate for you to make sure that what you want is what's going to happen. We need to have that person. Sometimes it's almost like, sometimes I feel like I'm almost like a bouncer for people, where I'm going to be like right there with you, with your family, and being like, no, this is not what we talked about. This is not what Dad wanted. Remember, we had the conversation. Let's talk to the doctors. I'm going to ask the right questions. Like, we really will be there to advocate for what it is you want, but we also need to know. We need to have that conversation ahead of time.
I love it. Jill, how can my listeners connect with you and listen to your podcast, Seeing Death Clearly?
So the podcast is on all major podcast platforms. And again, it is called Seeing Death Clearly. And my business is End of Life Clarity. I tried to kind of connect the two. But that's really what I want to do, is help people get clear around end of life and not be so confused and scared and overwhelmed. And I have my website, End of Life Clarity, but that's also what I am on all social medias. So whether it's Facebook or TikTok or Instagram, so people connect with me there. And people are always welcome to send me an email. And that email address is also on all the social medias as well.
Awesome. Jill, thanks for talking with me today. I love talking with somebody who sort of speaks the language, hospice to hospice, end of life to end of life. Thanks for spending time with me.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being able to have this conversation with you.
Check out Jill's podcast, which is Seeing Death Clearly. Her company itself and her website are called End of Life Clarity. So that's how you can connect with her on social media and on the internet. So check out Seeing Death Clearly on your favorite podcast platform. Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.